you thinking of making the transition from a corporate job to being a business owner, entrepreneur, or even a freelancer? If so, I've got a few tips that are going to help make that transition as smooth and successful as possible. I'm Gabby from She Makes It Work, and I've recently done the same thing. I left my corporate job a few months ago, and I have been working on starting up and running our new business along with my partner, Abby. I've also been studying this process for a very long time to prepare myself, and I'd like to make sure that you have these tips so that you can make that process a little bit smoother and faster for yourself. The number one thing to keep in mind is that you need to shift into a mindset of learning. And you are probably used to being very good at what you're doing, and what you're learning in your current job or in your current role is incremental. So what you're doing is you're building on skills that you already have, or you're going deeper into knowledge on a topic that you already have. Maybe you have a lot of specific functional skills or technical skills. So what you're doing is just growing those skills that you already have. When you are shifting into being a business owner, entrepreneur, freelancer, you are going to be learning a lot of new things, and that's exciting and that's fun. And as humans, we're built to learn. But if you're like me, where you might be a little bit older and you're like, okay, yeah, no, I'm used to being good at things, what you need to prepare yourself for is that you're not going to instantly be good at everything, and that's okay. What you need to have is that expectation that you need to be learning. That helps you in a couple different ways. One, so you don't beat yourself up for not knowing how to do something that you've never done before. Two, you can get ahead of the learning curve by identifying what gaps you have and going out and actively gaining those skills or studying those topics to shorten that learning curve so you don't have to learn everything the hard way. And three, there are some things that you genuinely learn best through experience, but if you have that mindset of, hey, this is a new thing I'm doing, of course I need to be learning new things, then you're going to be embracing those opportunities for learning and appreciating those experiences instead of, again, beating yourself up, or frankly, what I see some people doing is closing the door to taking those learnings anew. So if you have that mindset of, hey, there's going to be new stuff I'm going to learn, then what you do is you make sure that you have enough time built into your day. Set aside time for intentional learning. Keep your eyes and your mind open when you're going through these new experiences, and recognize when you have a new thing to learn and approach it with that really humble and constructive perspective of, I want to learn from this. And then also identify people that you can learn from. Is that somebody in your network, or is it a resource online? For example, Abby and I spent quite a bit of time studying the people who came before us on YouTube, because there are a lot of things I knew about business management and client management, but I'd never done the YouTube thing before. And so I learned from the SMEs that went ahead of me. So whatever business you want to start up and run, really sit down and identify as much as possible what's needed, what do you need to know to do that business, and where can you go for that knowledge, and try and get that as much as possible ahead of time. Now, again, if you embrace this learning perspective, you will experience so much less frustration because you're not going to be as hard on yourself, but also it means that you can, I'm going to say this again because I think it's really important, set aside enough time in your day for learning. I'm spending hours a day, and we've been doing this for a few months now. I'm still spending hours and hours and hours a day learning. And when I look at some of the bigger business leaders who are sharing their knowledge and everything for free, that's one of the things they say is that, 10 years into being multi-millionaires running these businesses, they still spend a significant portion of their day and their money, frankly, going out and learning new skills and learning how to constantly improve. So it's a little bit different than in the corporate world where, like I said, you're used to knowing most of what you need to know. You're used to having most of the skills, and you're just kind of incrementally increasing them. So I would say pause and really reflect on that, because as much as we tried to prepare ourselves for the fact that there would be a big learning curve, it's significantly more than both of us thought. And that's a good thing. That's one of the things that I'm loving about it, and it's exciting. Now, if you're a little earlier in your career and you're like, no, Gabby, I feel like I'm learning all the time, like my corporate job is quite confusing. Okay, yeah, good for you, but expect the same when you're starting your business, but you're just going to need to shift what it is that you're learning. So that's the number one thing. Have a learner mindset. Now, my kind of sub point to that is that so many of the skills you have in corporate are absolutely translatable to your new business, more so than you might think. So any professional skills that you have around leadership and management, working with vendors, working with clients, just really sit down and do a little bit of a skills inventory and make sure that you acknowledge and celebrate where you do have skills and see how that translates into your new business. And if you're working with multiple people in your new business, let's say you have business partners or you're bringing on employees or staff, just really think about what is it that you bring to the table, and where you can lean in on the things that you do know while you continue to learn the things that you don't. But that kind of helps inform those decisions, as well as making you feel better that no, this isn't a completely bonkers bananas choice. Like, of course you've been learning your whole life, and of course the things you've learned are going to be helpful. So I'd say that the number two big thing to keep in mind about being an entrepreneur and starting a new business is that you need to have a significant amount of discipline. Now, discipline is what keeps us going when our motivation founders. So motivation is that excitement, like I'm going to go do this thing. You're so motivated to do it. Motivation ebbs and flows, but to build a business, you need to stay steady. You need to be constantly working on it when you don't feel like it, when you're not sure if it's going to work. You need to keep going. And what keeps you going is discipline. Discipline also keeps you working on the things that maybe you don't like working on. Like as a business owner, you have to do a lot more of the jobs that you're used to other people doing in your corporate life. That's on you. You need to do those jobs. And we don't always love those things, right? Like that's just a reality. But if you have the discipline to make yourself do the work you don't want to do, that discipline is what's going to make you successful. Because businesses often fail because people just give up or they don't work at them consistently. They don't stick to it. And that discipline is going to give you the stick-to-itiveness to make sure that you ride the rough times in your new business. It gets you past when you're feeling self-doubt. You have to do the work anyway. And it keeps you going when you're just a little company with a staff of one or two people, including you, and the work still has to get done. So just make sure that before you start the business, you sit down and A, think about that mindset of being a continuous learner and approaching everything with that learning perspective, and B, making sure that you're prepared to have the discipline to keep going, even if you don't feel like it. And know that self-doubt is normal. Having ebbs and flows in motivation is normal. It doesn't mean that you made the wrong decision at all. That's completely normal. Every successful business person that you will meet has had their doubts, has had their rough times, have had setbacks, but it's that discipline that keeps you going that gives you that eventual and then long-term success. My third major point is about managing your schedule. And you can lean a little bit on discipline for this one, but it is its own thing because you need to think about how you structure your day and your time. If you're coming from a corporate job, 9 times out of 10, most of the way that your day is structured is actually dictated by external forces, by recurring meetings that your leadership is set up, by systems that are put in place, by things your client does. Even if you've been the one driving the system, you maintain that schedule because other people are dependent on you or other people are the ones responsible and accountable for it. So what I'm saying is there's a lot of ownership of your schedule and how you structure your day that you need to take on yourself and be prepared for. And especially, it's going to be different if you are continuing your day job while you're trying to start your business, or if you have the freedom and the resources to focus completely on your business. This is still important in very different ways. So first of all, if you are maintaining a day job while trying to start and run your business, you have to be extra focused on time management and prioritization so that you can make sure that you don't let either of them slip. Like you can't let your day job slip if you're dependent on that income, but you also need to make sure that you're spending enough time and energy on the new business. And so if that's the situation, I would sit down and seriously have a look at your own capacity and make sure that you really understand how much time you can genuinely devote to both and where quality can suffer and where it can't, right? That's just reality. Now, if you are able to not have your day job and focus 100% on your business, then really think about how you prioritize your activities to grow the business. So we've talked a little bit about when we started our channel, we were very clear on our priorities, which was making good content and growing our audience. And so while there's plenty of other things we do, everything falls by the wayside when it comes to, we need to make content, we need to grow the audience. Any leftover time goes to everything else, basically. Now, with your new business, those may be different activities, but you're going to need to sit down and think about what productivity means and what it looks like as a business owner, which is very different than what you've been used to in your corporate job. Because at the end of the day, you're making a product or a service, just like for us, that's our content, right? That's your number one, is to make your product or service, and you have to market it. That's number two. Now, all the other stuff, the logistics about your company, things like that, those need to be done as well. Those are supplemental activities, and so you need to build those into your day. But again, you need to like weave them in around what your main priorities are. Now, that's a whole other topic in and of itself, which is like how you need to actually grow and run your business. So I'm sure that there's lots of other resources about that, or I can make another video about that specifically, but just really be aware that the way you spend your time, you are in control of that, but that means you need to be responsible for that. And you're going to have to lean on that discipline for number two a little bit to make sure that you actually sustain those, which leads me into my fourth point, which is that you don't have any external accountability, or not much. Now, if you take on investors, then you do have some accountability to your investors, noted, right? But for the most part, like whether you succeed or fail, whether you have that meeting or produce that deliverable or create the thing, you're accountable to yourself. And so you have to get a really strong muscle around self-accountability because there's less external accountability. You can lean on your discipline to make sure that you do things, but that's why I'm kind of going in the order that I'm going in, which is that if you have your discipline and if you set up your kind of productivity and your schedule so that you know what you need to be doing and focused on and how you spend your time, then it's a lot easier for this point, which is that internal accountability. So making sure that you set your goal and you know what activity goes towards that goal and making sure you actually do the thing. That's on you now as a business owner. And that's, again, a big mind shift. It's a wonderful freedom. And so many people want to be independent business owners to have this specific freedom. But what I want you to be able to do is just mentally prepare yourself for what that means in terms of genuinely planning and preparing to hold yourself accountable. And it's okay that that might be a bit of a process, right? You're going to start, you're going to have a few months, you're going to have some like stops and starts, and again, with the ebbs and the flows, right? The important thing is to be aware that there's going to be a moment where you realize, oh my gosh, nobody else is making me do this. Nobody's going to fuss at me if I don't do this thing. It's all on me. My success or my failure completely depends on me. And again, very empowering, very freeing, and at some point, a little bit scary. So again, be prepared. Just know what you're going to do with that and plan on holding yourself accountable. One thing that I see some business owners doing is having a community around them, whether that's in their niche or whether that's in their business area or joining groups of other business owners who are doing something similar. Yes, there's value in community, but in this case, a lot of that value is about, additional sources of motivation and accountability as well. So I see people who are new YouTubers who are joining like classes and new YouTuber groups, but one of the biggest pieces of value they get out of that is they're actually then accountable to their class. They're all setting goals together. They check in on their goals together. So having a cohort of some kind while you're building this business can actually help give you just a little bit of that external accountability and a little bit of nudge on the motivation as well to help you keep going and help you stick to what you need to be doing. So I highly recommend finding some sort of a cohort or a community to join that will help you stay accountable to your goals. That's not going to, they're not going to hold you accountable for the day-to-day stuff, but it's a lot easier to stay on track with the day-to-day stuff when you know that you have to, go back to your little club or whatever and tell them, did you hit that goal? Did you do the thing? Did you produce the 5 pieces of content? Or did you, land that vendor that you were trying to land? My next point is about vendor management. So depending on what your business is, you may or may not work with vendors, freelancers, or other companies for services. At some point, you're going to want to, or else it's going to be super hard to scale. But when you think about even in the beginning, are you getting somebody for branding help? Are you getting somebody for website help? Are you getting somebody for social media help, marketing, blah, 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 blah. Or if you are producing a physical product, you may be working with a manufacturer. And so If you are working with a service provider of any kind, make sure that you are prepared to genuinely do vendor selection and vendor management. So you may have been responsible for these things in your corporate life. That is an area where these skills genuinely do transfer. It is a little different even then, though, because if you've been managing vendors in corporate, you have the weight of your company behind you and the value of the money of your company, and the vendors tend to respect that. I'm just going to leave it at that. When you are independent and starting a new itty bitty little company, the vendors, they don't necessarily take you as seriously. So your skills translate, but there's still going to be some differences at the point. And if you've never done vendor management or vendor selection before, this is an area where that constant learner hat is going to come in super handy, because it's not as easy as, oh, I'm a people person, I'll just talk to people and figure it out. It's really not. And if you're not used to holding a vendor or a service provider accountable, it can be really, really, really uncomfortable at first. It's especially difficult because as a new business and as a small business, you have limited financial resources. I don't care if you got an investor in funding, you still have limited money, and it's much more personal. It's your money that you're spending. And so you have to be really sure that you are looking at the right things when you go through the vendor selection process, and that when it comes to managing the vendor and holding them accountable, that you are getting the value for your money. Now, most other people have good intentions. That's fine. This isn't about intentions. It's about execution and value. Because again, as a small business, you don't have a ton of resources, and you may not have the time to deal with someone who has to do things over and over and over again to get to the final result you want. That can delay you significantly. Like if you have an aggressive launch date and you're working with vendors who can't meet their dates, you need to know what those warning signs are early on. And so with a vendor, what you want to make sure that you have is complete vision alignment from the beginning. If you are not sure about that, do not engage that vendor. Do not work with a vendor who wants you to pay 100% of their fees up front. Absolutely not. Then you have no leverage over them and they haven't done anything for you. Why would you pay them in advance? The third thing that you want to make sure with a vendor is that you have similar working styles and working agreements. So if you like a fast pace, but you're working with a vendor or a partner or a service provider who has a more traditional scale and scope, and they're looking at longer timelines because that's what they're used to, that's not a good fit. You need to make sure that how you expect to execute and what you need is something they can actually do. And that includes communication style. So you need to make sure you and your vendor communicate very well early on. And one of the things that can trip you up with finding compatible communication styles is if someone is too agreeable. If a vendor is too agreeable early on, that gives you a false sense of alignment, and it makes you feel like your communication styles are more of a match than they are. So I would say agreeability up front is actually a red flag. So if the vendor's agreeing to, oh yeah, that sounds amazing, I love your brand, that totally makes sense to me, or sure, I can do 15 meetings a day, yeah, and they'll be free, that's no problem. No, these are all red flags, right? Like you need a vendor who can accurately state what they need to be successful, how they work. They should be able to push back on you about one or two things. So agreeability early on is a red flag because you're not seeing how to navigate any sort of disagreement, and they're also probably not completely representing themselves 100% honestly. Not out of malice, not out of any ill intent, but they just may not have those communication skills. So again, vendor management, it's a whole thing in and of itself. Please, if you're not familiar with it, try and find some resources online, or if you want me to make another video specific about vendors, I absolutely will. I've been managing vendors for decades. I love it, but it is its own thing. And so again, that's kind of what you're looking for when you find the vendor. And then once you have them, you need to make sure that you guys have mutually agreed deadlines. You know what's going to be delivered on those deadlines. And if you're finding that you're spending more time following up with your own vendor and managing them, they're probably not the service provider you need, because now not only are you spending your money on them, you're also spending your time, which is your only other asset at this point. So be careful. Make sure you have an out in your vendor contract if the services are not working out. And that's another reason why you don't want to pay up front. And again, the intention is not to screw over your vendors. You want an equitable partnership, but if they're not delivering what you need them to deliver and they're just burning your time and money, you need to have a way out. What I see a lot of new business owners doing is they tend to grant a lot of credit and credibility to other new small business owners. And I love the thought that a rising ship lifts people up. I love that. But you are not yet a rising ship. You are in the water, you've got 5 holes in your canoe, and you can't take on other people's canoes is really the point here. This is an example where you need to maybe latch onto a bigger ship that knows what it's doing and make sure that the vendor you're working with isn't drowning you. The next point is employees. Now, I've seen Vanessa Lau does a really good video on this, on why she shut down her YouTube business, took a break for a year, and then came back. And one of the things that she cited was she took on too many employees. So a lot of people, when they're building businesses, they get really excited about having employees. Now, you need to make sure that it makes sense financially, because that's another thing I see a lot of new business owners saying after the fact is they didn't realize how much overhead they were getting into with their employees. So actual employees, you have salary, benefits, and now you have people whose financial lives are dependent on you. And so if you hire 20 people, you need to make sure you can genuinely sustain those 20 people. And you might have made a great sale and you need help. That's awesome, but you don't know if you're going to get a second sale. So I would just say be careful about employees and just recognize that there's a huge amount of financial overhead and there's a huge amount of management overhead that goes into having employees. So if you want to hire, I would say start small. Make sure that you have a really good plan for how you're going to increase, your recurring revenue so that you can support these employees long term. And definitely don't bite off more than you can chew. Yes, contractors are more expensive than employees, but sometimes that is the right answer. Sometimes you don't need full-time help and you don't need it to scale. And so I would just be really judicious and cautious about bringing on employees, especially at first. It can be tempting, but just think about other ways to get done what you need to get done. Another big thing to think about is your own effective communication skills, because it's a little bit different when you're a business owner. So when you've been in corporate life, unless you've been at like the C-suite level, so much of your communication genuinely goes into appeasing people and managing their feelings. That's what you have to do to survive the corporate life. That's just reality, right? As a business owner, you need to make sure that you know how to hone your communication skills so that you're being really clear about what you need from a service provider or what you can deliver when you're speaking to a customer or a prospective customer. So really think hard about how you can hone your own communication skills so that you aren't wasting your time and everybody else's fumbling around, being unclear, not capturing what you want to capture in the communication. And this is really, really important. And it's really important for your customers. It's really important for your vendors and partners. And if you do end up having employees, it's especially more important for your employees. Now, being direct with kindness is an art, but it is one of the most valuable things you can do as a business owner. So think about when you were in your corporate job and you were speaking to your leadership or upper level management. You just wanted them to be clear with you. You wanted to know what the expectations of you were. You wanted to know what they were doing, what their goals were, so you could support them. If you've worked with clients, it's the same thing. Like, how many times have you worked with a client that couldn't tell you what they wanted, or thought they were being clear and they weren't, or said something was okay when it wasn't? Now that you're a business owner, you do not want to be that person. You do not want to be that annoying client. You do not want to be that service provider who makes promises they can't keep. So just really prepare to hone your communication skills. And an example of this is, let's say you're working with a vendor and let's say you have a hard deadline. You need to tell them exactly what you want. Again, you need to be clear about how you need to work, like how you want to do check-ins, and you need to make sure that they know that that's the hard deadline and that that's not when they should be giving you the first draft, for example. So I've actually seen new business owners make this mistake where they're working with the vendor and they just keep saying things are fine, or yeah, that date's okay, and the date's like past their deadline. Like, again, you wouldn't think that happens. It really does happen a lot. So just really think about the job you're doing communicating and if you're being as clear as you need to be so that other people can help you be successful. or with your own clients so that you're giving them promises you can actually deliver on. Another example of this is when you've been in corporate and you're not the sales guy, so I'm sorry if there's salespeople out there, I don't mean to offend you, but coming up in tech, we always had that kind of stereotype of the sales guys who wrote checks that his company couldn't cash, metaphorically speaking, meaning he would sign up things for the product that the product did not do. And he would tell clients, this is a mythical he, by the way, because so many tech salespeople do this, where they promise these features to clients and these features do not exist. They're not on the roadmap. Sometimes they're not even physically possible. So in all of my years in technology, I've seen this happen hundreds and hundreds of times where salespeople will overpromise. And so if you've been in that situation where you've observed that, whether you've had a salesperson do that to you or you've been in corporate and you've been on the hook for something somebody else promised, keep that in mind, because now that you're the business owner and you're your sales team, especially at first, make sure you don't do that. You do not want to be that guy. Now let's talk about grace, because as a new business owner, it's also really important to give yourself grace when you make mistakes. One of the things that we as humans do, because we're feeling people, not just thinking people, is that sometimes we'll mess up and then we'll spend so much time beating ourselves up for that mistakes that we actually then make the mistake worse. Like we are busy feeling bad about it instead of maybe fixing it, or we're so busy, processing how bad we feel about the mistake that then we're not doing other things we need to do to advance our business. So that goes back to keeping focused on your priorities and lean on that discipline in this situation too. So that discipline we talked about earlier, you need to keep going even if you've messed up. You need to keep going even if you've made mistakes, and your own future depends on that. And so give yourself grace if you've messed up. Do not spend too much time beating yourself up. If you know what the lesson is, take the lesson and move on. If you don't yet know what the lesson is, put it in your journal and shelve it and keep going, and then come back to it every once in a while and see if you can figure out what the lesson is, or take it to your mentor or coach or whoever. So again, just give yourself grace. And then when I talk about holding vendors and employees accountable, I'm not trying to make it sound like you can't ever give them grace. You do want to be understanding and you do want to give them grace, but at the end of the day, when it is a business relationship, you do need to be able to very clearly see, am I getting what I need out of this? You can give grace on the small things, but fundamentally, you need to be having your needs met in this business relationship. And if you're not, that is where it's time to move on. After warnings, after good conversations, etc. So be understanding and give grace from a human perspective, while also being a business person and making the right decision for your business, because it needs you to. And that brings me to my final point. I know I talked a lot about community and cohorts, and those are so important. And what's also important is to know if you need a coach or a mentor in your field. So that might be somebody who's specifically focused on helping entrepreneurs and business people. It might be somebody who's focused on your niche. For example, our niche is helping professional women. So we're looking for coaching and mentorship in our niche. Or it could be, if you're doing YouTube, you might want to join a YouTube coaching program. So I'd say do your due diligence, evaluate anybody before you take them on and start working with them, and especially if it's a paid service, but just really think about, where are you getting that mentorship and coaching? For me, for example, I'm a fast learner, but I have my own mental blocks. I am super confused about SEO all the time. Like, so many of the business people that I've been watching talk about the coaches and mentors they find. Someone who's ahead of them, but isn't too much ahead of them where it doesn't make sense for them to mentor and coach, and just how much value they get out of that one-on-one mentorship and coaching. So if you're trying to figure out if you need this kind of mentorship and coaching, or if you can afford it or need to figure out how to afford it, I would say just really look at how much information is out there and how much you can learn from that information, and if there's a gap where you need one-on-one coaching and support. So if you've been middle management and you're trying to make the leap into, well, now you're a business owner, you're your own CEO for a while at least, probably, right? Do you need a coach who's going to help you be more of an executive and show up like an executive? Or is there a specific skill you're lacking where you can take a course, but there's something about it that's just not clicking? I, for example, have worked with coaches quite a few times in my career, and sometimes it's been for like a specific need that I have, where I know that I'm just struggling with this specific skill. My leaders and my network haven't been able to really help me with that click and making it kind of land with me. And so I've engaged professional coaches to help me through that. Just really think about, is there a space where I need it? What does that look like for me? And how can I make that happen? I say that while also emphasizing there is so much free resources and content out there. And obviously that should be the first thing you do. And then also sometimes group support can be less expensive. Like if you join like a paid cohort or a mastermind or something, sometimes those group situations can scratch that itch. But sometimes if what you need is genuinely really specific, or if it's really like personal, right, then that might be one where it's worth getting one-on-one coaching or a professional mentor. If you guys have any suggestions, anything you want to add to anything I've said, please add it in the comments. I'm so interested. I'm also a constant learner, as you can tell. And so I totally want to know if you guys have tips that I didn't mention in this video. I'd love to hear them. Or if any of the viewers have questions about anything I've said, put those in the comments as too. I will answer any question that you guys put in the comments. I really just want to hear from you and know, is this helping, or is there something you're still struggling with? Or if you've come before us, what would you want to share with people and make sure that they know? So think really hard if you're at a point in your career where you want to leave the corporate world behind and make this jump. I have found it incredibly invigorating and fulfilling and challenging in a fun and new way. It's scary, but I think it's going to be worth it. And I hope that that's true for you too. The other reason I wanted to talk about this is I saw some insanely low statistic on the number of women starting new businesses, and it genuinely made me sad. So if you're a woman and you're watching this, I want to encourage you to think hard about, why wouldn't you start your own business? What is holding you back? Do you have a good idea? Do you have a passion for doing this? If you're happy where you are, that is totally fine. But if you've watched the video this far, I'm going to say you're probably interested in starting your own business or have already made the decision to do so. And I just really want to encourage you to go for it. Now, if you're not at that point yet, or if you're still noodling on it and you're worried about, do I have a good idea? Is it marketable? How do I come up with and vet business ideas? I highly recommend reading Noah Kagan's book, $1 Million Weekend. It's a bit of a gimmicky title. I know it sounds like clickbait. It is actually a very, very useful book if you're in that stage where you know you want to do something, but you're not sure how to refine your ideas or come up with the right ideas and filter them so that you can know if it's truly a marketable idea. Absolutely recommend the book. It's super good. I have a video coming up soon that is a book review of that book if you want to hear more about it. Otherwise, I say just go get it, read it, listen to it on audiobook, whatever. It is going to change your life if you're thinking about doing this. This is Gabby from She Makes It Work. Like and subscribe. Comment down below, like I said, if anything resonated, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks, y'all. Bye.